Along Came a Spider by James Patterson. Prologue, Catch a Spider. Chapter 1, Washington, D.C. The cross house was 20 paces away, and the proximity and sight of it made Gary Siniji's skin prickle. It was Victorian style, white shingled, and extremely well kept. As Siniji stared across Fifth Street, he slowly bared his teeth in a sneer that could have passed for a smile. This was perfect. He had come here to murder Alex Cross and his family. His eyes moved slowly from window to window, taking in everything, from the crisp white lace curtains to Cross's old piano on the sun porch, to a Batman and Robin kite stuck in the rain gutter on the roof. Damon's kite, he thought. On 2 occasions he caught sight of Cross's elderly grandmother as she shuffled past one of the downstairs windows. Nana Mama's long, purposeless life would soon be at an end. That made him feel so much better. Enjoy every moment. Stop and smell the roses. Siniji reminded himself. Taste the roses. Eat Alex Cross's roses, flowers, stems, and thorns. He finally moved across Fifth Street, being careful to stay in the shadows. Then he disappeared into the thick yews and forsythia bushes that ran like sentries alongside the front of the house. He carefully made his way to a whitewashed cellar door, which was to one side of the porch, just off the kitchen. It had a master padlock, but he had the door open in seconds. He was inside the cross house. He was in the cellar. The cellar was a clue for those who collected them. The cellar was worth 1,000 words, 1,000 forensic pictures too. It was important to everything that would happen in the very near future. The Cross murders. There were no large windows, but Siniji decided not to take any chances by turning on the lights. He used a maglite flashlight just to look around, to learn a few more things about Cross and his family, to fuel his hatred if that was possible. The cellar was cleanly swept as he had expected it would be. Cross's tools were haphazardly arranged on a pegged masonite board. A stained Georgetown ball cap was hung on a hook. Siniji put it on his own head. He couldn't resist. He ran his hands over folded laundry laid out on a long wooden table. He felt close to the Doom family now. He despised them more than ever. He felt around the hammocks for the hammocks of the old woman's bra. He touched the boy's small jockey underwear. He felt like a total creep, and he loved it. Siniji picked up a small red reindeer sweater. It would fit Cross's little girl, Jenny. He held it to his face and tried to smell the girl. He anticipated Jenny's murder and only wished that Cross would get to see it too. He saw a pair of Everlast gloves and black pony shoes tied around a hook next to a weathered old punching bag. They belonged to Cross's son Damon, who must be 9 years old now. Gary Siniji thought he would punch out the boy's heart. Finally, he turned off the flashlight and sat all alone in the dark. Once upon a time, he had been a famous kidnapper and murderer. It was going to happen again. He was coming back with a vengeance that would blow everybody's mind. He folded his hands in his lap and sighed. He had spun his web perfectly. Alex Cross would soon be dead, and so would everyone he loved. Chapter 2, London. The killer who was currently terrorizing Europe was named Mr. Smith, no first name. It was given to him by the Boston Press, and then the police had obligingly picked it up all over the world. He accepted the name as children accept the name given by their parents, no matter how gross or disturbing or pedestrian the name might be. Mr. Smith, so be it. Actually, he had a thing about names. He was obsessive about them. The names of his victims were burned into his mind and also into his heart. First and foremost, there was Isabella Calais, then came Stephanie Michaela Apt, Ursula Davies, Robert Michael Neal, and so many others. He could recite the complete names backward and forward, as if they had been memorized for a history quiz or a bizarre round of Trivial Pursuit. That was the ticket. This case was Trivial Pursuit, wasn't it? So far, no one seemed to understand. No one got it. Not the fabled FBI, not the storied Interpol, not Scotland Yard, or any of the local police forces in the cities where he'd committed murders. No one understood the secret pattern of the victims, starting with Isabella Calais in Cambridge, Massachusetts, March 22nd, 1993, and continuing today in London. The victim of the moment was Drew Cabot. He was a chief inspector of all the hopelessly inane things to do with your life. He was hot in London, having recently apprehended an IRA killer. His murder would electrify the town, drive everyone mad. Civilized and sophisticated London loved a gory murder, as well as an Nexburg. This afternoon, Mr. Smith was operating in the Tony fashionable Knightsbridge section. He was there to study the human race. At least that's the way the newspapers described it. The press in London and across Europe also called him by another name, Alien. The prevailing theory was that Mr. Smith was an extraterrestrial. No human could do the things that he did. Or so they said. Mr. Smith had to bend low to talk into Drew Cabot's ear, to be more intimate with his prey. He played music while he worked, all kinds of music. Today's selection was the overture to Don Giovanni. Opera buffa, B-U-F-F-A. Felt right to him. Opera felt right for this live autopsy. 10 minutes or so after your death, Mr. Smith said, flies will already have picked up the scent of gas, accompanying the decomposition of your tissue. Green flies will lay the tiniest eggs within the orifices of your body. Ironically, the language reminds me of Dr. Seuss, green flies and ham. What could that mean? I don't know. It's a curious association, though. Drew Cabot had lost a lot of blood, but he wasn't giving up. He was a tall, rugged man with silver blonde hair. A never-say-never sort of chap. The inspector shook his head back and forth until Smith finally removed his gag. "What is it, Drew?" he asked. "Speak." "I have a wife and 2 children. Why are you doing this to me?" "Why me?" he whispered. Let's say because you're Drew. Keep it simple and unsentimental. You, Drew, are a piece of the puzzle." He tugged the inspector's gag back into place. No more chit-chat from Drew. Mr. Smith continued with his observations as he made his next surgical cuts, and Don Giovanni played on. Near the time of death, breathing will become strained, intermittent. It's exactly what you're feeling now, as if each breath could be your last. "Cessation will occur within 2 or 3 minutes," whispered Mr. Smith, whispered the dreaded alien. "Your life will end. May I be the first to congratulate you. I sincerely mean that, Drew. Believe it or not, I envy you. I wish I were Drew. Part 1, Train Station Murders. Chapter 3. I am the great Cornholio. Are you challenging me? I am Cornholio. The kids chorused and giggled. Beavis and Butthead strike again in my neighborhood. I bit my lip and decided to let it go. Why fight it? Why fan the fires of pre-adolescence? Damon, Janny, and I were crowded into the front seat of my old black Porsche. We needed to buy a new car, but none of us wanted to part with the Porsche. We were schooled in tradition, in the classics. We loved the old car, which we had named the Sardine Can, and Old Paintless. Actually, I was preoccupied at 20 to 8 in the morning. Not a good way to start the day. The night before, a 13-year-old girl from Ballou High School had been found in the Anacostia River. She'd been shot and then drowned. The gunshot had been in her mouth, what the coroners call a hole-in-one. A bizarre statistic was creating havoc with my stomach and central nervous system. There were now more than 100 unsolved murders of young, inner-city women committed in just the past 3 years. No one had called for a major investigation. No one in power seemed to care about dead Black and Hispanic girls. As we drove up in front of the Sojourner Truth School, I saw Christine Johnson welcoming kids and their parents as they arrived, reminding everyone that this was a community with good, caring people. She was certainly one of them. I remember the very first time we met. It was the previous fall, and the circumstances couldn't have been any worse for either of us. We'd been thrown together, smushed together, someone said to me once, at the homicide scene of a sweet baby girl named Chanel Green. Christine was the principal of the school that Chanel attended, and where I was now delivering my own kids. Janny was new to the truth school this semester. Damon was a grizzled veteran, a 4th grader. What are you mischief makers gawking at? I turned to the kids, who were looking back and forth from my face to Christine's, as if they were watching a championship tennis match. We're gawking at you, Daddy, and you're gawking at Christine, Janny said and laughed like the wicked child witch of the north that she can be sometimes. She's Mrs. Johnson to you, I said, as I gave Janny my best squinting evil eye. Janny shrugged off my baleful look and frowned at me as only she can. I know that, Daddy. She's the principal of my school. I know exactly who she is. My daughter already understood many of life's important connections and mysteries. I was hoping that maybe someday she'd explain them to me. Damon, do you have a point of view we should hear? I asked. Anything you'd like to add? Care to share some good fellowship and wit with us this morning? My son shook his head no, but he was smiling too. He liked Christine Johnson just fine. Everybody did. Even Nana Mama approved, which is unheard of and actually worried me some. Nana and I never seem to agree about anything, and it's getting worse with age. The kids were already climbing out of the car, and Janny gave me a kiss goodbye. Christine waved and walked over. What a fine, upstanding father you are, she said. Her brown eyes twinkled. You're going to make some lady in the neighborhood very happy one of these days. Very good with children, reasonably handsome, driving a classy sports car. My. My, back at you, I said. To top everything off, it was a beautiful morning in the early June. Shimmering blue skies, temperature in the low 70s, the air crisp and relatively clean. Christine was wearing a soft beige suit with a blue shirt and beige flat-heeled shoes. Be still my heart. A smile slid across my face. There was no way to stop it, to hold it back, and besides, I didn't want to. It fit me fine with the fine day I was starting to have. I hope you're not teaching my kids that kind of cynicism and irony inside that fancy school of yours. Of course I am, and so are all my teachers. We speak educanto with the best of them. We're trained in cynicism, and we're all experts in irony. More important, we're excellent skeptics. I have to get inside now so we don't miss a precious moment of indoctrination time. It's too late for Damon and Johnny. I've already programmed them. A child is fed with milk and praise. They have the sunniest dispositions in the neighborhood. Maybe in all of Southeast, maybe in the entire city of Washington. Oh, we've noticed that, and we accept the challenge. Got to run young minds to shape and change. I'll see you tonight, I said as Christine was about to turn away and head toward the Sojourner Truth School. Handsome Miss Sin, driving a nice Porsche. Of course you'll see me tonight, she said. Then she turned away and headed toward the school. We were about to have our first official date that night. Her husband, George, had died the previous winter, and now Christine felt she was ready to have dinner with me. I hadn't pushed her in any way, but I couldn't wait. Half a dozen years after the death of my wife, Maria, I felt as if I were coming out of a deep rut, maybe even a clinical depression. Life was looking as good as it had in a long, long time. But as Nana and Mama had often cautioned, don't mistake the edge of a rut for the horizon. Chapter 4. Alex Cross is a dead man. Failure isn't an option. Gary Sinigi squinted through a telescopic sight he'd removed from a Browning automatic rifle. The scope was a rare beauty. He watched the oh-so-touching affair of the heart. He saw Alex Cross drop off his 2 brats and then chat with his pretty lady friend in front of the Sojourner Truth School. Think the unthinkable, he prodded himself. Sinigi ground his front teeth as he scrunched low in the front seat of a black Jeep Cherokee. He watched Damon and Janelle scamper into the schoolyard, where they greeted their playmates with high and low fives. Years before, he'd almost become famous for kidnapping 2 school brats right here in Washington. Those were the days, my friend, those were the days. For a while, he'd been the dark star of television and newspapers all over the country. Now it was going to happen again. He was sure that it was. After all, it was only fair that he be recognized as the best. He let the aiming post of the rifle's sight gently come to rest on Christine Johnson's forehead. There, isn't that nice? She had very expressive brown eyes and a wide smile that seemed genuine from this distance. She was tall, attractive, and had a commanding presence. The school principal. A few loose hairs lay curled on her cheek. It was easy to see what Cross saw in her. What a handsome couple they made, and what a tragedy this was going to be. What a damn shame. Even with all the wear and tear, Cross still looked good, impressive. A little like Muhammad Ali in his prime. His smile was dazzling. As Christine Johnson walked away and headed toward the red brick school building, Alex Cross suddenly glanced in the direction of Sinichi's Jeep. The tall detective seemed to be looking right into the driver's side of the windshield, right into Sunichi's eyes. That was okay, nothing to worry about, nothing to fear. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't taking any risks, not here, not yet. It was all set to start in a couple of minutes, but in his mind, it had already happened. It had happened 100 times. He knew every single move from this point until the end. Gary Sunichi started the Jeep and headed toward Union Station, the scene of the crime to be, the scene of his masterpiece theater. Think the unthinkable, he muttered under his breath, then do the unthinkable. Chapter 5. After the last bell had rung and most of the kids were safe and sound in their classrooms, Christine Johnson took a slow walk down the long, deserted corridors of the Sojourner Truth School. She did this almost every morning and considered it one of her special treats to herself. You had to have treats sometimes, and this beat a trip to Starbucks for cafe latte. The hallways were empty and pleasantly quiet, and always sparkling clean as she felt a good school ought to be. There had been a time when she and a few of her teachers had actually mopped the floors themselves, but now Mr. Gomez and a porter named Lonnie Walker did it 2 nights a week, every week. Once you got good people thinking in the right way, it was amazing how many of them agreed a school should be clean and safe, and were willing to help. Once people believed the right thing could actually happen, it often did. The corridor walls were covered with lively, colorful artwork by the kids, and everybody loved the hope and energy it produced. Christine glanced at the drawings and posters every morning, and it was always something different, another child's perspective that caught her eye and delighted her inner person. This particular morning, she paused to look at a simple yet dazzling crayon drawing of a little girl holding hands with her mommy and daddy in front of a new house. They all had round faces and happy smiles and a nice sense of purpose. She checked out a few illustrated stories. Our Community, Nigeria, Whaling. But she was out here walking for a different reason today. She was thinking about her husband George and how he died and why. She wished she could bring him back and talk to him now. She wanted to hold George at least one more time. She needed to talk to him. She wandered to the far end of the hall to room 111, which was light and yellow and called Buttercup. The kids had named the rooms themselves, and the names changed every year in the fall. It was their school, after all. Christine slowly and quietly opened the door a crack. She saw Bobby Shaw, the second-grade teacher, scrubbing notes on the blackboard. Then she noticed row after row of mostly attentive faces, and among them Johnny Cross. She found herself smiling as she watched Johnny, who happened to be talking to Ms. Shaw. Johnny Cross was so animated and bright, and she had such a sweet perspective on the world. She was a lot like her father. Smart, sensitive, handsome as sin. Christine eventually walked on. Preoccupied, she found herself climbing the concrete stairs to the second floor. Even the walls of the stairwells were decorated with projects and brightly colored artwork, which is part of the reason most of the kids believed that this was their school. Once you understood something was yours, you protected it, felt a part of it. It was a simple enough idea, but one that the government in Washington seemed not to get. She felt a little silly, but she checked on Damon too. Of all the boys and girls at the Truth School, Damon was probably her favorite. He had been even before she met Alex. It wasn't just that Damon was bright and verbal and could be very charming. Damon was also a really good person. He showed it time and time again with the other kids, with his teachers, and even when his little sister entered the school this past semester. He treated her like his best friend in the world, and maybe he already understood that she was. Christine finally headed back to her office where the usual 10 to 12-hour day awaited her. She was thinking about Alex now, and she supposed that was really why she had gone and looked in on his kids. She was thinking that she wasn't looking forward to their dinner date tonight. She was afraid of tonight, a little panicky, and she thought she knew why. Chapter 6. At a little before 8 in the morning, Gary Sinigi strolled into Union Station as if he owned the place. He felt tremendously good. His step quickened and his spirits seemed to rise to the height of the soaring train station ceilings. He knew everything there was to know about the famous train gateway for the capital. He had long admired the neoclassical facade that recalled the famed baths of Caracalla in ancient Rome. He had studied the station's architecture for hours as a young boy. He'd even visited the great train store, which sold exquisite model trains and other railroad-themed souvenirs. They could hear and feel the trains rattling down below. The marble floors actually shook as powerful Amtrak trains departed and arrived, mostly on schedule, too. The glass doors to the outside world rumbled, and he could hear the panes clink against their frame. He loved this place, everything about it. It was truly magical. The keywords for today were train and cellar, and only he understood why. Information was power, and he had it all. Gary Sinigi thought that he might be dead within the next hour, but the idea of the image didn't trouble him. Whatever happened was meant to, and besides, he definitely wanted to go out with a bang, not a cowardly whimper, and why the hell not? He had plans for a long and exciting career after his death. Gary Sinigi was wearing a lightweight black jumpsuit with a red Nike logo. He carried 3 bulky bags. He figured that he looked like just another yuppified traveler at the crowded train station. He appeared to be overweight, and his hair was gray for the time being. He was actually 5'10", but the lifts in his shoes got him up to 6'1" today. He still had a trace of his former good looks. If somebody had wanted to guess his occupation, they might say teacher. The cheap irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been a teacher once, one of the worst ever. He'd been Mr. Sinigi the Spider-Man. He had kidnapped 2 of his own students. He had already purchased his ticket for the Metroliner, but he didn't head for his train just yet. Instead, Gary Sinigi crossed the main lobby, hurrying away from the waiting room. He took a stairway next to the Center Cafe and climbed to the balcony on the 2nd floor, which looked out on the lobby about 20 feet below. He gazed down and watched the lonely people streaming across the cavernous lobby. Most of these assholes had no idea how undeservedly lucky they were this particular morning. They would be safely on board their little commuter trains by the time the light and sound show began in just a few minutes. What a beautiful, beautiful place this is, Sunichi thought. How many times he dreamed about this scene. This very scene at Union Station. Long streaks and spears of morning sunlight shafted down through the delicate skylights. They reflected off the walls and the high gilded ceiling. The main hall before him held an information booth, a magnificent electronic train arrival and departure board, the Center Cafe, Sfuzi, and America restaurants. I think it's supposed to say American restaurants. The concourse led to a waiting area that had once been called the largest room in the world. What a grand and historic venue he'd chosen for today, his birthday. Gary Sunichi produced a small key from his pocket, flipped it in the air and caught it. He opened a silver-gray metallic door that led into a room on the balcony. He thought of it as his room. Finally, he had his own room, upstairs with everyone else. He closed the door behind him. Happy birthday, dear Gary. Happy birthday to you. Chapter 7. This was going to be incredible, beyond anything he'd attempted so far. He could almost do this next part blindfolded, working from memory. He'd done the drill so many times, in his imagination, in his dreams. He'd been looking forward to this day for more than 20 years. He set up a folding aluminum tripod mount inside the small room and positioned a Browning rifle on it. The BAR was a dandy with a mil-spec scoping device and an electronic trigger he'd customized himself. The marble floors continued to shake as his beloved trains entered and departed the station, huge mythical beasts that came here to feed and rest. There was nowhere he'd rather be than here. He loved this moment so much. Sunichi knew everything about Union Station and also about mass murders conducted in crowded public places. As a boy, he had obsessed on the so-called crimes of the century. He had imagined himself committing such acts and becoming feared and famous. He planned perfect murders, random ones, and then he began to carry them out. He buried his first victim on a relative's farm when he was 15. The body still hadn't been found, not to this day. He was Charles Starkweather. He was Bruno Richard Hauptmann. He was Charlie Whitman, except that he was much smarter than any of them, and he wasn't crazy like them. He'd even appropriated a name for himself. Sunichi, pronounced So-Ni-Chi. The name had seemed scary to him even at 13 or 14. It still did. Starkweather, Hauptmann, Whitman, Sunichi. He'd been shooting rifles since he was a boy in the deep, dark woods surrounding Princeton, New Jersey. During the past year, he'd done more shooting, more hunting, more practicing than ever before. He was primed and ready for this morning. Hell, he'd been ready for years. Sunichi sat on a metal folding chair and made himself as comfortable as he could. He pulled up a battleship gray tarp that blended into the background of the train terminal's dark walls. He snuggled under the tarp. He was going to disappear to be part of the scenery, to be a sniper in a very public place in Union Station. An old-fashioned sounding train announcer was singing out the track in time for the next Metroliner to Baltimore, Wilmington, Philadelphia, and New York's Penn Station. Sunichi smiled to himself. That was his getaway train. He had his ticket and he still planned to be on it. No problem, just book it. He'd be on the metro line or bus. Nobody could stop him now except maybe Alex Cross, and even that didn't matter anymore. His plan had contingencies for every possibility, even his own death. Then Shinichi was lost in his thoughts. His memories were his cocoon. He had been 9 years old when a student named Charles Whitman opened fire out of a tower at the University of Texas in Austin. Whitman was a former Marine, 25 years old. The outrageous, sensational event had galvanized him back then. He collected every single story on the shootings, long pieces from Time, Life, Newsweek, the New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, Times of London, Paris Match, Los Angeles Times, Baltimore Sun. He still had the precious articles. They were at a friend's house being held for posterity. They were evidence of past, present, and future crimes. Gary Shinichi knew he was a good marksman, not that he needed to be a crackerjack in this bustling crowd of targets. No shot he'd have to make in the train terminal would be over 100 yards, and he was accurate at up to 500 yards. Now I step out of my own nightmare and into the real world, he thought, as the moment crystallized. A cold, hard shiver ran through his body. It was delicious, tantalizing. He peered through the Browning's telescope at the busy, nervous, milling crowd. He searched for the first victim. Life was so much more beautiful and interesting through a target scope. Chapter 8. You Are There. He scanned the lobby with its thousands of hurrying commuters and summer vacation travelers. Not one of them had a clue about his or her mortal condition at that very moment. People never seemed to believe that something horrible could actually happen to them. Shinichi watched a lively brat pack of students in bright blue blazers and starched white shirts. Preppies, gosh darn preppies. They were giggling and running for their train with unnatural delight. He didn't like happy people at all, especially dumbass children who thought they had the world by the nuts. He found that he could distinguish smells from up here. Diesel, fuel, lilacs and roses from the flower vendors, meat and garlic shrimp from the lobby's restaurants. The odors made him hungry. The target circle in his customized scope had a black slate post rather than the more common bullseye. He preferred the post. He watched a montage of shapes in motion and colors swim in and out of death's way. This small circle of the Grim Reaper was his world now, self-contained and mesmerizing. Shinichi let the aiming post come to rest on the broad, wrinkled forehead of a weary-looking businesswoman in her early to mid-50s. The woman was thin and nervous, with haggard eyes, pale lips. "Say goodnight, Gracie," he whispered softly. "Good night, Irene. Good night, Mrs. Calabash." He almost pulled the trigger, almost started the morning's massacre. Then he eased off at the last possible instant. Not worthy of the first shot, he thought, chastising himself for impatience. Not nearly special enough. Just a passing fancy. Just another middle-class cow. The aiming post settled in and held as if by a magnet on the lower spine of a porter pushing an uneven load of boxes and suitcases. The porter was a tall, good-looking black, much like Alex Cross, Shinichi thought. His dark skin gleamed like mahogany furniture. That was the attraction of the target. He liked the image, but who would get the subtle, special message other than himself? No, we had to think of others too. This was a time to be selfless. He moved the aiming post again, the circle of death. There were an amazing number of commuters in blue suits and black wingtips. Business sheep. A father and teenage son floated into the circle as if they'd been put there by the hand of God. Gary Sinigi inhaled. Then he slowly exhaled. It was his shooting ritual, the one he'd practiced for so many years alone in the woods. He had imagined doing this so many times, taking out a perfect stranger for no good reason. He gently, very gently, pulled the trigger toward the center of his eye. His body was completely still, almost lifeless. He could feel the faint pulse in his arm, the pulse in his throat, the approximate speed of his heartbeat. The shot made a loud cracking sound, and the sound seemed to follow the flight of the bullet down toward the lobby. Smoke spiraled upward, inches in front of the rifle barrel. Quite beautiful to observe. The teenager's head exploded inside the telescopic rifle. Beautiful. The head flew apart before his eyes. The Big Bang in miniature, no? Then Gary Sinigi pulled the trigger a second time. He murdered the father before he had a chance to grieve. He felt absolutely nothing for either of them. Not love, not hate, not pity. He didn't flinch, wince, or even blink. There's no stopping Gary Sinigi now, no turning back. Chapter 9. Rush hour. 8:20 a.m. Jesus almighty, no. A madman was on the loose inside Union Station. Sampson and I raced alongside the double lanes of stalled traffic that covered Massachusetts Avenue as far as the eye could see. When in doubt, gallop. The maxim of the old Foreign Legion. Car and truck drivers honked their horns in frustration. Pedestrians were screaming, walking fast, or running away from the train station. Police squad cars were on the scene everywhere. Up ahead on North Capitol, I could see the massive all-granite Union Station terminal with its many additions and renovations. Everything was somber and gray around the terminal, except the grass, which seemed especially green. Sampson and I flew past the new Thurgood Marshall Justice Building. We heard gunshots coming from the station. They sounded distant, muffled by the thick stone walls. It's for real, Sampson said as he ran by my side. He's here. No doubt about it now. I knew he would be. An urgent call had come to my desk less than 10 minutes earlier. I had picked up the phone, distracted by another message, a fax from Kyle Craig of the FBI. I was scanning Kyle's fax. He desperately needed help in his huge Mr. Smith case. He wanted me to meet an agent, Thomas Pierce. I couldn't help Kyle this time. I was thinking of getting the hell out of the murder business, not taking on more cases, especially a serious bummer like Mr. Smith. I recognized the voice on the phone. It's Gary Sinigi, Dr. Cross. It really is me. I'm calling from Union Station. I'm just passing through D.C. and I hoped, against hope, that you'd like to see me again. Hurry, though. You better scoot if you don't want to miss me. Then the phone went dead. Sinigi had hung up. He loved to be in control. Now, Sampson and I were sprinting along Massachusetts Avenue. We were moving a whole lot faster than the traffic. I had abandoned my car at the corner of 3rd Street. We both wore protective vests over our sport shirts. We were scooting as Sinigi had advised me over the phone. What the hell is he doing in there? Sampson said through tightly gritted teeth. That son of a bitch has always been crazy. We were less than 50 yards from the terminal's glass and wood front doors. People continued to stream outside. He used to shoot guns as a boy, I told Sampson. Used to kill pets in his neighborhood outside Princeton. He'd do sniper kills from the woods. Nobody ever solved it at the time. He told me about the sniping when I interviewed him at Lorton Prison. Called himself the pet assassin. Sounds like he graduated to people, Simpson muttered. We raced up the long driveway, heading toward the front entrance of the 90-year-old terminal. Sampson and I were moving, burning up shoe leather, and it seemed like an eternity since Sunichi's phone call. There was a pause in the shooting, then it began again. Weird as hell. It definitely sounded like rifle reports coming from inside. Cars and taxis in the train terminal's driveway were backing out, trying to get away from the scene of gunfire and madness. Commuters and day travelers were still pushing their way out of the building's front doors. I'd never been involved with a sniper situation before. In the course of my life in Washington, I'd been inside Union Station several hundred times. Nothing like this, though, nothing even close to this morning. He's got himself trapped in there, purposely trapped. Why the hell would he do that? Sampson asked, as we came up to the front doors. Worries me too, I said. Why had Gary Sunichi called me? Why would he effectively trap himself in Union Station? Sampson and I slipped into the lobby of Union Station. The shooting from the balcony, from up high and somewhere, suddenly started up again. We both went down flat on the floor. Had Sunichi already seen us? Chapter 10. I kept my head low as my eyes scanned the huge and portentous train station lobby. I was desperately looking for Sunichi. Could he see me? One of Nana's sayings was stuck in my head. Death is nature's way of saying howdy. Statues of Roman legionnaires stood guard all around the imposing main hall of Union Station. At one time, politically correct Pennsylvania Railroad execs had wanted the warriors fully clothed. The sculptor Louis St. Gaudens had managed to sneak by every third statue in its accurate historical condition. I saw 3 people already down, probably dead, on the lobby floor. My stomach dropped, my heart beat even faster. One of the victims was a teenage boy in cutoff shorts and a Redskins practice jersey. A second victim appeared to be a young father. Neither of them was moving. Hundreds of travelers and terminal employees were trapped inside arcade shops and restaurants. Dozens of frightened people were squashed into a small Godiva chocolate store and an open cafe called America. The firing had stopped again. What was Sunichi doing? And where was he? The temporary silence was maddening and spooky. There was supposed to be lots of noise here in the train terminal. Someone scraped a chair against the marble floor, and the screeching sound echoed loudly. I palmed my detective's badge at a uniformed patrolman who had barricaded himself behind an overturned coffee table. Sweat was pouring down the uniformed cop's face to the rolls of fat at his neck. He was only a few feet inside one of the doorways to the front lobby. He was breathing hard. You all right? I asked as Simpson and I slid down behind the table. He nodded, grunted something, but I didn't believe him. His eyes were open wide with fear. I suspected he'd never been involved with this sniper either.